The auction hall reeked of desperation and expensive perfume. Kaelthor stood at the back of the crystalline amphitheater, his massive form casting shadows that flickered across the polished floor like dark flames. Around him, the elite of the Draconic Empire preened and postured, nobles in their humanoid forms, draped in silks that shimmered with embedded starlight, their scales barely concealed beneath tailored garments that cost more than entire planetary systems. He had lived for 3,000 years. He had seen empires rise from dust and collapse into memory. He had fought in wars that reshaped galaxies. And now, in the twilight of an existence that stretched beyond mortal comprehension, he stood in an auction house watching broken souls sold like cargo. The auctioneer, a sleek Velrosian with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian, gestured dramatically toward the platform. A female from one of the insectoid races stood there, her carapace gleaming under the lights, her antenna trembling with barely suppressed terror. Lot 47, a fine specimen from the Kresh colonies, excellent genetic compatibility with most draconic bloodlines, trained in 7 forms of pleasure arts, fluent in 12 galactic languages. 500 credits, a voice called from the front rows. 600. 7. Kaelthor watched with tired eyes as the bidding escalated. The female was sold for 930 credits to a younger dragon who looked pleased with himself, as if he had won some great prize rather than purchased a person who had no choice in the matter. The Velrosian auctioneer clapped 2 of his hands together. Excellent. Lot 48 approaches. Another platform rose from below, this time a Zenthari female with luminescent skin that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Beautiful, exotic, rare. The bidding started at 800 and climbed quickly. Kaelthor turned to leave. He had come here on a whim, driven by loneliness and the hollow hope that perhaps there might be someone, anyone, who could understand what it meant to carry the weight of centuries. But this was not the place for such foolish dreams. This was a marketplace of flesh, nothing more. And now, honored guests, we come to our final lot of the evening. Something in the auctioneer's tone made Kaelthor pause. There was a note of disdain there, of barely concealed contempt. Lot 49, a human female. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Kaelthor turned back slowly. The platform rose, and on it stood a young woman who looked as if she had been broken and badly mended. She was thin, too thin, with dark hair that hung in matted tangles around a face marked by exhaustion and old bruises. Her clothes were little more than rags, torn and stained. Her feet were bare, her wrists bore the marks of restraints, and her skin was pale in a way that spoke of malnutrition and despair. But her eyes were clear, steady. They swept across the assembled nobles without fear, without pleading, with a kind of quiet observation that seemed entirely out of place in someone standing on an auction block. As you can see, this lot is imperfect, the auctioneer continued with a dismissive wave. Damaged goods from a failed colony raid. Humans, as we all know, are a primitive species, short-lived, weak, prone to emotional instability. They lack the genetic diversity for proper draconic compatibility. Their technology is laughably crude, and their culture is barely worth studying. More laughter. A female dragon in the third row wrinkled her nose. Why even bother bringing one here? The auctioneer shrugged with all 4 shoulders. A curiosity piece, perhaps. A servant for menial tasks. We must dispose of all seized property, no matter how worthless. The starting bid is 10 credits. Silence. 10 credits would barely buy a meal in the lower districts. The auctioneer waited, his expression growing more annoyed. 10 credits for the human. Anyone? She is healthy enough to work, if nothing else. The woman on the platform did not move. She did not beg. She simply stood there, her gaze distant, as if she had already accepted whatever fate awaited her. No bids? Very well, we shall... 10 credits. The voice was Kaelthor's own, and it surprised him as much as it surprised everyone else. Every head in the amphitheater turned. The auctioneer blinked all 3 of his eyes in succession. Lord Kaelthor, you wish to bid on the human. Kaelthor stepped forward, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. He was still in his humanoid form, but even so, he stood head and shoulders above most of the crowd. His silver hair fell past his shoulders. His eyes were the color of molten gold, and the faint shimmer of scales along his cheekbones marked him as ancient nobility. I do. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Kaelthor the Deathless? Why would he want a human? Has he finally lost his mind after all these years? The auctioneer recovered quickly, his professional smile snapping back into place. 10 credits to Lord Kaelthor. Going once, going twice. He paused, clearly hoping someone else would bid just to make the sale less embarrassing. No one did. Sold. The crack of the gavel echoed through the hall. Kaelthor made his way toward the collection area, ignoring the stares and murmurs that followed him like a wake of carrion birds. He had spent 3,000 years caring what others thought. He was done with that. A clerk handed him a datapad. Sign here, my lord. The human is now your legal property under imperial law. All sales are final, no returns, no refunds. Kaelthor pressed his thumb to the screen without reading the terms. 10 credits transferred from his account, an amount so small the transaction barely registered. She will be brought to you shortly, my lord. We must process the ownership transfer and fit her with a tracking collar. No collar. The clerk blinked. My lord, it is standard procedure for all purchased. No collar. Kaelthor's voice was soft, but there was dragon fire beneath it. She is not livestock. The clerk swallowed hard. As you wish, my lord. They brought her to him 10 minutes later, led by 2 guards who seemed far more afraid of Kaelthor than necessary. Up close, she was even more fragile-looking than she had appeared on the platform. Her skin was marked with scars, some old, some recent. Her hands trembled slightly, though whether from cold or fear or exhaustion, he could not tell. The guards released her and stepped back quickly. Kaelthor looked down at the woman who now legally belonged to him, this human who had been sold for less than the cost of lunch, and he felt something he had not felt in centuries. Shame. Not at buying her. He had done that to save her from a worse fate. But shame at the system that allowed this to happen. Shame at his people, who could look at another living being and see only a price tag. The woman looked up at him. Her eyes were brown, deep and dark like earth soil, and in them he saw no gratitude, no relief, no fear. Just that same quiet observation, as if she was studying him the way a scholar might study an ancient text. What is your name? He asked quietly. She hesitated, as if the question itself were a trap. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse from disuse, but steady. Elara. Elara. He repeated it carefully, tasting the unfamiliar syllables. I am Kaelthor. You are. You are free to go if you wish. I will arrange transport to any colony world you choose, provide you with enough credits to start a new life. You owe me nothing. For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps. Or disbelief. Free. She said the word as if it were in a language she had forgotten. Free. She looked past him, toward the exit of the auction house, then back at him. Her gaze was measuring, calculating. And if I have nowhere to go? If every colony I knew is ash? If I have no family, no home, no credits, no identification papers that any world would recognize? Kaelthor had not considered that. Of course, she would have nothing. She had been cargo, property seized in a raid. Everything she had once owned would have been destroyed or confiscated. Then he paused, uncertain. Then you may stay with me if you wish. As a guest, not a servant, not a bride. I have a fortress in the Crystal Mountains. It is isolated, but it is safe. You would have your own quarters, your own freedom. You could leave whenever you chose. Elara studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, just that. No questions about why he had bought her. No demands for explanations. No tearful gratitude or suspicious interrogation. Just a simple acceptance of an impossible situation. Kaelthor found himself smiling slightly, a rare expression for him these days. Come then, let us leave this place. They walked out of the auction house together, the ancient dragon and the human woman worth 10 credits, and behind them the whispers of the nobility grew into a roar of scandalized gossip that would echo through the empire for months to come. But neither of them looked back. Outside, Kaelthor's transport waited, a sleek vessel of black crystal and silver metal, beautiful and deadly like all things draconic. Elara climbed aboard without hesitation, settling into one of the passenger seats, as if she had been riding in ships like this all her life. As the transport lifted off and the auction house fell away beneath them, Kaelthor glanced at his unexpected passenger. She was staring out the window at the cityscape below, towers of crystal and steel that pierced the clouds, bridges of light spanning impossible distances, ships like silver fish swimming through the air. Her expression was unreadable. Have you ever seen a draconic city before? He asked. Once, she said quietly, when they came to take us. Kaelthor said nothing. There was nothing to say. His people had done this to her world, to her life. No words could change that. They flew in silence toward the mountains, toward the fortress that had been his home for 500 years, toward whatever strange future awaited them both. And Kaelthor wondered, not for the first time that evening, what he had truly bought for 10 credits. He would find out soon enough. The crystal mountains rose before them like frozen lightning, and the transport banked toward home. The fortress emerged from the mountains like a crown of ice and stone. Elara pressed her forehead against the transport window, watching as the structure grew larger against the twilight sky. It was vast, impossibly vast, carved directly into the face of a mountain peak that pierced the clouds. Spires of crystal jutted from the rock like frozen flames, catching the last light of the setting suns and scattering it into 1,000 colors. Bridges of stone spanned between towers, delicate as spiderwebs despite their obvious strength. And everywhere there was a sense of age, of time measured not in years but in epochs. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then immediately wished she hadn't spoken. Speaking made things real, and she wasn't sure she was ready for this to be real yet. Kaelthor glanced at her, something softening in those ancient golden eyes. "It was built 1,200 years ago by my nest mother. She wanted a place far from the politics of the capital, far from the endless games of the court, a place to think, to rest." "Is she dead?" 3 centuries now. He said it without emotion, but Elara heard the weight beneath the words. 3 centuries of grief carried like stones in his chest. Dragons live long lives, but not forever. Nothing lives forever. The transport descended toward a landing platform that jutted from the side of the mountain like an outstretched hand. The moment they touched down, the hatch opened, and cold mountain air rushed in, sharp and clean and so different from the recycled atmosphere of the auction house that Elara gasped. Kaelthor stood, his tall frame unfolding with the grace of something that had never been truly human. "Come, I'll show you to your quarters." Elara followed him out onto the platform. The wind caught her hair, her ragged clothes, and she shivered. From cold, yes, but also from the sheer magnitude of where she was. Below them, clouds stretched like a white ocean. Above, the stars were beginning to emerge, strange constellations she didn't recognize. She was so far from Earth now, so impossibly far from everything she had ever known. "This way." Kaelthor led her across the platform and through massive doors that opened at his approach. The interior of the fortress was just as breathtaking as the exterior. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow high above. Pillars of crystal glowed with soft internal light, illuminating corridors wide enough for a dragon in full form to walk comfortably. The walls were carved with intricate patterns, not decorative, Elara realized, but historical. Battle scenes, diplomatic gatherings, celestial maps of stars long dead. Their footsteps echoed in the silence. "Do you live here alone?" Elara asked, her voice small in the vastness. "Mostly. I have a few automated systems for maintenance, and occasionally a trade ship delivers supplies. But I prefer solitude to company these days. Most company, anyway." He glanced back at her. "The guest quarters are in the eastern tower. You'll have privacy there, and a good view of the sunrise, if you wake early enough." They climbed a spiral staircase that seemed to wind upward forever. Elara's legs burned with exhaustion. She had been given little food and less rest in the weeks since her capture, but she forced herself to keep moving. She would not show weakness. Not now. Not to him. Finally, they reached a corridor lined with doors. Kaelthor stopped at the third one and pressed his palm against the crystal panel beside it. The door slid open with a soft hiss. "This will be yours." Elara stepped inside and stopped. The room was larger than the entire shelter she had lived in back on the colony. A massive bed dominated one wall, piled with furs and blankets that looked impossibly soft. There was a sitting area with cushioned chairs arranged around a fireplace where flames already crackled with warmth. Shelves lined another wall, empty but waiting. And along the far side, floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the mountain range, offering a view that would have cost a fortune anywhere else in the galaxy. "There's a bathing chamber through that door," Kaelthor said, pointing, "and a wardrobe with clothes that should fit, though they may need adjustment. I'll have the systems prepare something more suitable by morning." Elara turned to stare at him. "Why are you doing this?" He blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Doing what?" "This. All of this." She gestured at the room, at the luxury, at the kindness that made no sense. "You bought me for 10 credits. I'm worth nothing to your people. Less than nothing. You could have left me on that platform to be sold to someone who would have used me as a servant or worse. You could have brought me here and locked me in a cell. Instead, you give me a room like this and talk about freedom and choices." Her voice cracked slightly. "Why?" Kaelthor was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost sad. "Because I remember what it is to be alone, to feel as if the entire universe has forgotten you exist, or decided you don't matter. And because," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "because in 3,000 years of life, I have seen my people do terrible things in the name of empire, of progress, of power, and I am tired of it. So very tired. If I can offer one person a moment of peace, of safety, of dignity, then perhaps my existence has not been entirely wasted." Elara studied his face. There were no lies there, she thought. No hidden agenda, no manipulation, just exhaustion and a bone-deep weariness that she recognized, because she felt it too. "Thank you," she said finally. It was inadequate, but it was all she had. Kaelthor nodded. "Rest. Eat. The food synthesizer in the wall there can produce anything you request, though I don't know what humans prefer. If you need anything, call for me. The system will relay your voice throughout the fortress. I'll be in the central library if you wish to speak." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Elara, you asked why I'm doing this. Let me ask you something in return. Why did you accept? You could have demanded I take you to a colony world immediately. Instead, you agreed to come here, to a fortress in the middle of nowhere with a dragon you don't know. Why?" Elara looked out the window at the darkening sky, at the stars beginning to burn through the twilight. "Because I have nowhere else to go, and because," she turned back to him, "because you're the first person in a very long time who has looked at me and seen a person instead of a problem to be solved or a resource to be exploited. Even if you're a dragon, even if your people destroyed mine, you saw me." Something flickered in Kaelthor's eyes, pain perhaps, or recognition. He nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other." He left, the door sliding shut behind him, and Elara was alone. She stood in the center of the room for a long time, not quite believing any of this was real. Then, slowly, she walked to the window and pressed her hand against the crystal. It was cool beneath her palm, solid, real, real. She was here. She was alive. And for the first time since the raid that had destroyed her colony, she was safe. The tears came suddenly, unexpectedly, and she sank to her knees on the soft carpet, pressing her forehead against the window and letting herself break. All the fear, all the pain, all the loss she had held inside for weeks came pouring out in great wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for her family, dead in the raid. She cried for her friends, scattered to the stars or worse. She cried for the life she had lost, the future she would never have. And she cried for herself, for the girl she had been who no longer existed. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollow, but strangely lighter. She pulled herself to her feet and wiped her face with her ragged sleeve. "The bathing chamber," Kaelthor had said. Elara walked through the indicated door and found herself in a room that was almost as large as the bedroom. A pool of steaming water occupied the center, fed by a small waterfall that emerged from the wall. The air was warm and humid and smelled faintly of minerals and flowers she couldn't name. She stripped off her rags, she couldn't even think of them as clothes anymore, and stepped into the water. It was perfect, warm enough to soothe her aching muscles, deep enough to submerge completely, clean in a way she had almost forgotten water could be. She scrubbed at her skin, at her hair, washing away weeks of filth and fear until the water around her ran grey and then clear again. When she finally emerged, she found soft towels waiting on a heated rack and a simple robe of pale blue fabric that felt like clouds against her clean skin. She returned to the bedroom and approached the wardrobe Kaelthor had mentioned. Inside she found clothes in various styles, some clearly draconic in design, others more universal, all in muted colors and simple cuts. She selected a soft tunic and loose pants, both of which fit reasonably well and felt more human than she had in a very long time. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had eaten almost nothing in days. The food synthesizer was set into the wall near the sitting area. She approached it cautiously, studying the interface. It was written in Galactic Standard, which she could read thanks to the translation implant all colonists received. She scrolled through the menu options, overwhelmed by the choices. Finally, she selected something simple: bread, soup, fruit. The synthesizer hummed for a moment, then produced a tray with exactly what she had requested. Elara carried the tray to one of the chairs by the fire and sat down, curling her legs beneath her. The soup was hot and savory, the bread fresh and soft, the fruit sweet and cool. It was the best meal she had ever tasted, not because it was fancy or expensive, but because it was the first meal in weeks she had eaten without fear. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, and watched the fire dance in the hearth. When she was finished, she set the tray aside and simply sat, listening to the silence of the fortress. It wasn't an empty silence. She could hear the wind outside, the distant sound of water flowing somewhere, the soft hum of the crystal pillars. But it was peaceful, safe. For the first time since the raid, Elara allowed herself to think about what came next. She had survived. Against all odds, against all probability, she had survived. And now she was here, in a dragon's fortress, rescued by someone who claimed to want nothing from her. She didn't know if she could trust that. Didn't know if she could trust anything anymore, but she was too tired to worry about it tonight. Elara stood, walked to the massive bed, and pulled back the furs. The mattress beneath was soft beyond belief. She climbed in, pulled the blankets over herself, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would figure out what to do. Tomorrow she would ask questions and make plans and decide whether to stay or go. Tonight, she would simply rest. Within minutes she was asleep, and for the first time in weeks she did not dream of fire and death and the screaming of her people as the dragons came. She dreamed instead of stars and mountains and a dragon with sad golden eyes who had paid 10 credits for a life he had no reason to save. And somewhere in the depths of the fortress, in a library filled with books from 1,000 worlds, Kaelthor sat alone in the darkness and wondered what he had brought into his home. Not a bride, not a servant, not a possession, just a human woman who had looked at him and seen not a monster but a person. It had been a very long time since anyone had done that. He turned back to his books and tried to read, but the words blurred on the page, and his mind kept wandering to the guest quarters in the Eastern Tower, to the woman who now lived under his protection. He had spent 3,000 years alone, by choice. He wondered if that was about to change. Elara woke to sunlight streaming through the crystal windows like liquid gold. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The auction, the dragon, the fortress in the mountains. She sat up slowly, half expecting the room to vanish, to find herself back in the holding cell with the other captured colonists. But no, the luxurious bed was real. The warmth of the morning sun was real. The silence, broken only by the distant sound of wind, was real. She was still here. She rose and dressed in fresh clothes from the wardrobe, then stood at the window and looked out over the mountain range. The view was breathtaking. Peaks stretched to the horizon, their crystal faces catching the light and scattering it into rainbows. Below, clouds moved like slow rivers through the valleys. She could see no other buildings, no ships, no signs of civilization, just stone and sky and silence. It was beautiful. It was also the most isolated place she had ever been. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she was alive and needed to stay that way. She used the food synthesizer to create a simple breakfast, then hesitated. Should she stay in her room, explore the fortress, find Kaelthor and— What? Thank him again? Ask him what he expected of her? She decided to explore. She couldn't hide in her room forever, no matter how comfortable it was. The corridors of the fortress were just as impressive in daylight as they had been at night. Shafts of sunlight fell through high windows, illuminating the carved walls and making the crystal pillars glow. Elara walked slowly, trailing her fingers along the stone, reading the history carved there. She found battle scenes first, dragons in flight, breathing fire down on armies below. The enemy soldiers were depicted in intricate detail, and Elara recognized some of the species. Velrosians, Kresh, Zenthari, even humans, though these carvings were older, worn by time. Her people had fought the dragons once, long ago. They had lost. Further along she found diplomatic scenes, dragons and other species standing together, signing treaties, exchanging gifts. The carvings showed a different story here, one of cooperation, of alliance. It seemed the Draconic Empire had not always been built on conquest alone. She wandered deeper into the fortress, following corridors that twisted and branched like veins. She found rooms filled with strange artifacts, weapons from forgotten wars, crowns that no longer had kingdoms, books written in languages that had died with their speakers. It was a museum of lost things, she realized, a monument to everything that had ended. Eventually, she heard water. Following the sound, she descended a staircase and found herself in a vast chamber that took her breath away. A garden grew here impossibly, in the heart of the fortress. Trees reached toward skylights far above, their leaves filtering the sunlight into green-gold patterns on the moss-covered ground. A stream ran through the center, fed by a spring that bubbled up from the rock itself. Flowers grew in wild profusion, some familiar, most alien, all beautiful. And in the center of it all, tending to a plant with delicate silver leaves, was Kaelthor. He had changed from his formal auction clothes into something simpler, a loose tunic and pants in dark grey, his silver hair tied back. He looked more relaxed here, more at ease, kneeling in the dirt with his hands in the soil like any gardener. Elara must have made a sound because he looked up. "Good morning," he said quietly. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you." She stepped into the garden, feeling the soft moss beneath her feet. "This place is incredible. How do you grow all of this underground?" "The skylights provide natural light, and the spring water is rich in minerals." He gestured at the plants around them. "This garden was my nest mother's pride. She collected seeds from every world she visited, brought them here, gave them a place to grow. When she died, I took over the caretaking. It seemed wrong to let it die with her." Elara moved closer, studying the plant he was working on. Its silver leaves were edged with gold, and tiny flowers like stars dotted its branches. "What is this one?" "It's called a memory flower. It grows on a world in the outer rim, on a planet that orbits a dying star. The people there plant one for every person they lose, so that the garden becomes a living memorial." He touched one of the flowers gently. "This one is for my nest mother. It bloomed the day after she died, even though it shouldn't have been ready. I like to think she approved of the placement." Elara knelt beside him, looking at the flower with new eyes. "It's beautiful." She was beautiful too, fierce and brilliant, and absolutely terrifying when she wanted to be, but kind. Underneath it all, she taught me that strength without compassion is just cruelty wearing armor. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the garden, water flowing, leaves rustling, insects humming. "May I help?" Elara asked suddenly. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise Kaelthor. "Help? With the garden? I don't want to just sit in my room. I need to do something, be useful somehow, and I grew up on a farming colony. I know how to work with plants." Kaelthor studied her face, then nodded slowly. "I would appreciate that. There's more work here than one person can easily manage, even with automated systems." He stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. His hand was warm, his grip gentle despite the obvious strength in it. "Come, I'll show you the layout, explain which plants need what. Most are hardy enough to tolerate mistakes, but some are temperamental." They spent the morning together in the garden, and Elara found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. There was something peaceful about working with soil and water and living things, something that felt normal and real in a life that had become anything but. Kaelthor was patient, explaining each plant's needs, showing her where the tools were kept, answering her questions without judgment. He didn't treat her like a servant or a rescued refugee or a purchased bride. He treated her like a colleague, someone whose help he genuinely valued. It was strange, it was also wonderful. They broke for lunch in the garden, sitting beside the stream and eating food from the synthesizer. The conversation came easier now, flowing naturally. "How long have you lived here?" Elara asked. 500 years, give or take. After Nestmother died, I couldn't stay in the capital anymore. Too many memories, too much politics. I wanted peace, and this place offered it. "Do you ever get lonely?" He considered the question. "Yes, often. But loneliness is preferable to the alternative I found in the capital. There I was surrounded by people and still felt alone. Here at least the solitude is honest." Elara understood that. She had felt the same way in the holding cells, surrounded by other captured colonists but utterly isolated in her grief. "What about you?" Kaelthor asked. "Tell me about your colony, if you want to, I mean. If it's not too painful." Elara took a slow breath. It was painful, but maybe that was okay. Maybe pain was just love with nowhere left to go. It was called New Terra, a small agricultural colony on the edge of the frontier. We grew food for the larger worlds, shipped it out on the supply runs. It was hard work, but it was ours. My parents ran a seed distribution center. I had 2 younger brothers. She paused, the words catching in her throat. "When the raid came, we had no defenses, no weapons, just farmers and families. They didn't even give us a chance to surrender. They just took what they wanted and burned the rest." "I'm sorry. Are you?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Your people did this. Your empire." Kaelthor didn't flinch from the accusation. "Yes, my people, my empire, and I am sorry, truly, though I know that changes nothing. I did not order the raid, did not participate in it, but that doesn't absolve me. I am part of the system that allows such things to happen. I have been for 3,000 years. Then why don't you stop it? Because I am one dragon, and the Empire is vast. Because I spoke against the conquest policies once, centuries ago, and was branded a traitor for it. Because I have learned that the Empire does not change for individuals, no matter how loudly they shout. He looked away, his jaw tight. Because I am a coward, Elara. I chose isolation over resistance. I chose my own peace over the suffering of countless others, and I will carry that shame until I die. The honesty of it stunned her. She had expected excuses, justifications, the kind of political doublespeak she had heard from other Imperials. Instead, he gave her truth, raw and painful and real. I don't think you're a coward, she said quietly. I think you're tired. There's a difference. Kaelthor looked at her, something vulnerable in his ancient eyes. Thank you for that, though I'm not sure I deserve the kindness. They sat in silence for a while, the stream filling the quiet between them. Finally, Elara spoke again. Can I ask you something, the truth? Always. Why did you really buy me? Not the philosophical answer about dignity and compassion, the real reason. Kaelthor was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because when I saw you standing on that platform, looking out at all of us with those steady eyes, not begging or pleading or breaking, I saw myself. 3,000 years ago, when I was young and newly enslaved to duty and expectation, and the weight of what I was born to be. Standing alone in a crowd, already deciding that dignity was the only thing no one could take from me. He turned to face her fully. I bought you because I remembered what it felt like to be auctioned off to a future I didn't choose, and because I thought perhaps, just perhaps, I could offer you something better than what the Empire had planned. Elara felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them away, refusing to cry again. She had cried enough. Thank you, she said, for seeing me, for saving me, for this. She gestured at the garden, at the fortress, at the strange sanctuary he had created in the mountains. You're welcome, though I suspect you saved yourself long before I arrived. They returned to work then, side by side in the garden, two impossibly different beings finding common ground in soil and water and the quiet language of growing things. As the day wore on, Elara found herself watching Kaelthor when he wasn't looking. He moved with a grace that seemed at odds with his size, spoke with a gentleness that contradicted his draconic nature. He was careful with the delicate plants, patient with her questions, comfortable in the silence between conversations. He was not what she had expected when she imagined dragons. Then again, she supposed she was not what he had expected when he imagined humans. Evening came, painting the garden in shades of amber and gold. Kaelthor stood, stretching muscles that had been bent too long, and smiled at the work they had accomplished. You have a gift for this, he said, gesturing at the newly tended beds. The plants respond to you. My mother always said I had gentle hands, good for coaxing stubborn seeds to grow. She was right. They walked back to the main fortress together, and at the corridor where their paths would diverge, Kaelthor paused. Elara, tomorrow, if you would like, I could show you the library. It contains texts from across the galaxy, including quite a few from Earth. You might enjoy it. She smiled, her first real smile in longer than she could remember. I would like that very much. Good. Sleep well. You too. She returned to her room feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She bathed, ate dinner and climbed into bed as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky beyond her window. For the first time since the raid, she felt something that might have been hope. It was small and fragile, like a seedling pushing up through dark soil, but it was there, growing toward the light. And that, she thought, as sleep claimed her, was enough for now. The library was a cathedral of knowledge. Elara stood at the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it. The room stretched upward for what must have been 10 stories, with balconies spiraling around the walls at each level. Shelves lined every available surface, packed with books, data crystals, scrolls, tablets, and formats she didn't even recognize. Ladders on rails allowed access to the higher shelves, and floating platforms drifted lazily through the air, responding to gesture commands. Soft light emanated from the walls themselves, bright enough to read by but gentle on the eyes. The air smelled of old paper, ozone from data crystals, and something else, the indefinable scent of preserved knowledge. This is, Elara couldn't find words big enough, my nest mother's true legacy, Kaelthor said quietly, standing beside her. She believed that the greatest tragedy of war wasn't the destruction of cities or armies, but the loss of knowledge. Every time a world fell, Every time a species was conquered or went extinct, their stories died with them. So she made it her mission to collect and preserve as much as she could. Books, recordings, oral histories, anything that carried the voice of a people. He walked forward and Elara followed, still staring in wonder. The lower levels contain general knowledge, science, mathematics, engineering, medicine. The middle levels hold history, philosophy, religion, art. And the upper levels, he gestured toward the heights. Those hold the rarest pieces, the last surviving texts of extinct civilizations, the only copies of books burned on their homeworlds, the testimonies of survivors who had no one else to tell their stories to. Elara felt a lump form in her throat. It's beautiful and sad. Yes, both of those things. Kaelthor led her toward a section on the third level. The Earth collection is here, or rather the human collection. It includes works from all your colony worlds as well as your homeworld. My nest mother was particularly fond of human literature. She said humans had a gift for capturing emotion in words. The shelves in this section were packed with familiar spines. Elara saw titles she recognized from her childhood, classics that had been reprinted and distributed to the colonies. But she also saw books she had never heard of, texts in languages Earth had long since forgotten, digital archives marked with dates from centuries past. "May I?" she asked, reaching for a worn paperback. "Of course. Everything here is meant to be read, not merely preserved. Take whatever you like to your quarters." Elara pulled the book from the shelf. The cover showed an illustration of a small house on a prairie, and the title read, "Little House on the Prairie." She opened it carefully, breathing in the scent of old paper, and felt something break open inside her chest. "My mother used to read this to me," she whispered, "before I could read myself. I haven't thought about it in years." Kaelthor's expression softened. "Then it should go home with you tonight." Elara clutched the book to her chest, blinking back tears. "Thank you." They spent the next hour exploring the collection. Kaelthor showed her poetry from old Earth, novels from the Mars colonies, historical accounts of the generation ships that had carried humans to the stars. He showed her music stored in crystal format, plays meant to be performed, children's books illustrated with images of a world she had never seen, but that somehow felt like home. "There's so much," Elara said, running her fingers along the spines. "It would take a lifetime to read it all. Several lifetimes, I suspect. But that's the beauty of a library. You don't have to read everything. You just have to find what speaks to you." They settled into comfortable chairs near a window overlooking the mountains, and Kaelthor pulled a book from a nearby shelf for himself, something in a language Elara didn't recognize, with script that looked like art as much as writing. They read in companionable silence, the kind of quiet that exists between people who have moved past the need to fill every moment with words. After a while, Elara looked up. "Kaelthor, can I ask you something about dragons?" He set his book aside. "Of course. Are all dragons like you? I mean, the ones who came to my colony they were monsters. They killed without mercy, took what they wanted, burned everything else. But you're not like that. So which is the truth? What are dragons really?" Kaelthor was silent for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Dragons are complicated. We're an old species, Elara, ancient by most standards. We've existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and in that time we've been many things. Explorers and conquerors, philosophers and tyrants, protectors and destroyers." He paused. "The dragons who raided your colony were likely young, a few centuries old at most, still caught up in the glory of empire, still believing that strength gives them the right to take what they want. They haven't lived long enough yet to see the cost of such thinking. And you have? I have. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've seen species go extinct because we decided they had resources we needed more than they needed their lives. I've seen the best and worst of my people, and I've grown tired of pretending the worst is somehow justified." He met her eyes. "The truth is that dragons are capable of great nobility and terrible cruelty, sometimes from the same individual. We're not inherently evil, but we're not inherently good either. We're just people. People with power, which makes our choices more consequential, but people nonetheless." Elara nodded slowly. "My mother used to say something similar about humans, that we all carried light and shadow inside us, and the important thing was which one we chose to feed." "Your mother sounds like she was wise." "She was," Elara's voice caught. "She died trying to protect my brothers. She put herself between them and a dragon's fire. It didn't matter. The dragon killed them all anyway." Kaelthor closed his eyes, pain etched across his features. "I am so sorry." "I know you are. And I know you weren't there, you didn't do it. But it's hard sometimes, looking at you and remembering that you're the same species as the ones who murdered everyone I loved. I understand, and if you need to hate me for it, I won't blame you." Elara studied his face, the genuine remorse there, the weight of grief he carried for crimes he hadn't personally committed, but felt responsible for anyway. "I don't hate you. I want to sometimes. It would be easier if I could, but I don't." "Why not?" "Because you're here, in this library full of voices from dead worlds, reading and remembering, and trying to preserve what your empire destroys. Because you spent 10 credits to save someone who meant nothing to you. Because you tend a garden of memory flowers and talk about compassion like it's the only thing that matters." She paused. "Because you're not trying to be anything other than what you are, broken and tired and sorry, but still trying." Kaelthor looked at her with something that might have been wonder. "How did you survive, Elara? Not physically. I know you're strong. But how did you survive with your compassion intact? Most people who go through what you've been through come out hardened, closed off. You're still open, still kind. How?" Elara thought about it. "My mother told me something, right before she died. The colony was burning, people were screaming, and she pulled me close and said, 'Don't let them make you cruel. Whatever happens, whatever they do, don't let them take your heart.' So I didn't. I decided that if I was going to die, I would die as myself. And when I didn't die, when I ended up on that auction platform, I made the same choice. They could take my freedom, my dignity, my life, but they couldn't take who I chose to be." "That," Kaelthor said softly, "is perhaps the bravest thing I've ever heard." They fell silent again, but it was a deeper silence now, weighted with understanding. Eventually, Kaelthor stood and walked to a shelf near the back of the human section. He searched for a moment, then pulled out a slim volume bound in blue cloth. He brought it back to Elara and held it out. "This was one of my nest mother's favorites. She said it changed the way she thought about power and responsibility." Elara took the book and read the cover. "The Little Prince" by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. "I know this one too," she said, surprised. "It's a children's book. It's a book that children can read," Kaelthor corrected gently. "But it's not just for children. Read it again now with everything you've experienced. I think you'll find it speaks differently than it did when you were young." Elara opened the book to a random page and found herself reading, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." She looked up at Kaelthor, who was watching her with those ancient golden eyes, and she understood suddenly why his nest mother had loved this book, why he had given it to her now. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." The rest of the afternoon passed in gentle comfort. They talked about books, about worlds they had known, about small things and large things, and all the spaces in between. Kaelthor told her about his nest mother, about the adventures she had taken him on as a hatchling, about the lessons she had taught him. Elara told him about her colony, about the festivals they held at harvest time, about her brothers and the trouble they always got into. It was easy talking to him, easier than it should have been, perhaps, given everything, but grief had a way of cutting through pretense, leaving only the essential parts of people visible. As evening approached, Kaelthor showed her one more thing. He led her to an alcove on the top level, accessible only by floating platform. There, in a space lit by soft bioluminescent plants, stood a single pedestal. On it rested an open book, its pages protected by a shimmer field. "This is the Book of Names," Kaelthor said quietly. "My nest mother started it, and I've continued the work. Every time we learn of a world that has fallen, a species that has gone extinct, a culture that has been destroyed, we add their names here, not the names of leaders or heroes, just names. People who lived and died and deserve to be remembered." Elara approached the pedestal slowly. The page currently visible showed hundreds of names in tiny script, along with dates and locations. She recognized some of the world names, colonies that had been destroyed in recent raids. "May I add names?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Yes, please." Kaelthor showed her how to interact with the book, how to add entries. Elara's hands trembled as she began typing her family's names into the system. Sarah Chen, doctor, New Terra Colony, died protecting her children. Marcus Chen, engineer, New Terra Colony, died defending his home. Thomas Chen, age 8, New Terra Colony. Jacob Chen, age 6, New Terra Colony. She added her friends, her neighbors, everyone she could remember from the colony, every face that haunted her dreams. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face, but she felt lighter somehow. Emptier, but lighter. They won't be forgotten now. Kaelthor said softly. "Their names will live here as long as this fortress stands, as long as I live to maintain it. I promise you that." Elara nodded, unable to speak. They descended the platform in silence, and Kaelthor walked her back to her quarters as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. At her door, he paused. "Thank you for sharing this day with me, and for trusting me with their names. Thank you for giving them a place to rest." She went inside, carrying her books, and sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the mountains and the stars beyond. She thought about her mother's final words, about choosing not to become cruel, about keeping her heart open even when it hurt. And she thought about the dragon who had bought her for 10 credits, and who tended a library full of lost voices, trying in his own small way to honor the dead. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but perhaps, she thought, there was room in it for small acts of remembrance, small acts of kindness, small acts of hope. She opened The Little Prince and began to read, and the words felt like coming home. 3 weeks passed in the fortress like a dream. Elara fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. She woke with the sunrise, helped Kaelthor tend the garden, spent afternoons reading in the library, and evenings by her window watching the stars emerge. They talked less about the past and more about small everyday things: how to coax stubborn plants to bloom, which books were worth reading twice, the strange beauty of the mountain storms that rolled through the valleys below. She was healing slowly, the way broken bones knit themselves back together, painful at first, then just tender, then finally whole again. She was also starting to forget that Kaelthor was a dragon. Not forget exactly, but the knowledge had moved from the foreground of her mind to somewhere further back. He was simply Kaelthor now, quiet, thoughtful, kind in ways that had nothing to do with what species he belonged to. She had stopped flinching when he moved too quickly, stopped calculating escape routes every time they were in the same room, started trusting. Despite everything her survival instincts screamed at her, it was dangerous, this trust. She knew that. She trusted him anyway. On the 23rd day, everything changed. Elara was in the garden, pruning one of the memory flowers, when she heard a sound she had never heard before, a roar that shook the very walls of the fortress, full of pain and rage and something that might have been fear. She dropped her shears and ran. The sound had come from deeper in the fortress, from sections she had never explored. She followed the echoes through corridors that grew narrower and darker, until she reached a massive door carved with warnings in a dozen languages. All of them said the same thing: private, do not enter. She hesitated for only a moment, then pushed the door open. Beyond was a chamber unlike anything else in the fortress. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet overhead, and the floor was bare stone, marked with deep gouges that looked like claw marks. This was a place where a dragon could be a dragon, fully, completely, without restraint. And there, in the center of the chamber, was Kaelthor, but not the Kaelthor she knew. He was in his true form, massive beyond comprehension, his scales the color of storm clouds shot through with silver lightning. His wings stretched 50 feet on each side, membranes thin as silk but strong as steel. His head was crowned with horns that curved back like a throne, and his eyes blazed with golden fire. He was magnificent. He was also badly wounded. Blood, darker than human blood, almost black, seeped from a gash along his left flank. His left wing hung at an awkward angle, clearly broken, and as Elara watched in horror, he convulsed, another roar tearing from his throat. She should have run. Every instinct she had, every memory of dragons burning her colony screamed at her to run. Instead, she ran toward him. Kaelthor! His massive head swung toward her, and for a moment she saw nothing in those golden eyes but pain and confused fury. Then recognition flickered, and he shifted back, not fully to his humanoid form, but to something in between, smaller, but still decidedly draconic. Elara! His voice was a rumble of thunder. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. What happened? She was at his side now, staring at the wound. It was deep and the edges looked burned, as if whatever had hit him had been coated in acid or poison. Old injury. Acts up sometimes. He tried to sound dismissive, but she heard the pain beneath it. It will heal. Always does. That's not an old injury. That's fresh blood. She looked up at his face, at the lines of agony etched there. Tell me the truth. Kaelthor hesitated, then sighed, a sound like wind through a canyon. There was an incident. 3 days ago. I flew to the capital to retrieve a book that arrived for the library. While I was there, I encountered some younger dragons who took issue with my presence. They've heard the rumors about you, about the human I bought at auction. They consider it an insult to draconic dignity. They attacked you. They challenged me. I declined. They attacked anyway. He shifted his weight, wincing. I'm old, Elara. Still strong, still dangerous, but old. And they were many. I escaped, but not unscathed. Rage flared hot in Elara's chest. They did this because of me? They did this because they're young and stupid and have been raised to believe that might makes right. You are not responsible for their choices. He looked down at her, something soft in those fierce eyes. And I would make the same choice again, buying you, bringing you here, all of it. Elara felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away. Let me see the wound properly. Elara, you can't... Let me see it. Kaelthor shifted again, his form rippling like water, until he was in his humanoid shape. The wound remained, though smaller now, a gash along his ribs, still bleeding sluggishly, the edges dark and inflamed. Elara studied it with the clinical eye of someone who had grown up on a farming colony, where medical help was often days away, and you learned to handle injuries yourself, or people died. This is infected. Poisoned, maybe. Have you treated it at all? I poured some antiseptic on it. It will heal in time. In time? Kaelthor, you could die from this. Dragons don't die easily. Dragons aren't invincible either, or that wound wouldn't be there. She pointed at the gash. Where's your medical bay? Elara, I appreciate your concern, but where is your medical bay? Something in her tone must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. Second level, eastern wing. Take me there, now. She expected him to argue, but he simply stood and led her through the fortress. He moved carefully, like someone trying not to show how much pain they were in, and failing. By the time they reached the medical bay, he was leaning heavily on the wall. The medical bay was equipped with technology far beyond anything Elara had seen on her colony. Diagnostic scanners, synthesizers for medicine and tissue, even what looked like a regeneration pod. But it was all automated, designed for someone who lived alone. Sit, Elara ordered, pointing at the examination table. Kaelthor sat. Elara began pulling up the diagnostic systems, studying the readouts. The wound was deep, and something in it was preventing proper healing, some kind of poison that interfered with cellular regeneration. Left untreated, it would spread. Eventually, it would kill him. You should have told me 3 days ago, she said quietly, her fingers flying over the controls. I didn't want to worry you. Worry me. She turned to face him, anger and fear warring in her chest. Kaelthor, you're the only person in this entire galaxy who's shown me kindness since my world burned. You think I wouldn't worry? You think I wouldn't care? He stared at her, surprise written across his face. I didn't think... You didn't think I cared whether you lived or died. You didn't think it would matter to me. She turned back to the console, blinking back tears. You're an idiot. Yes, he said softly. I suppose I am. The diagnostic scanner identified the poison, something called Vexis toxin, used by younger dragons in duels because it was painful, but rarely fatal if treated quickly. But 3 days untreated was pushing the limits of even draconic resilience. Elara synthesized the antidote and a cocktail of healing accelerants, then turned back to Kaelthor with a hypodermic injector that looked like it could punch through armor plating. This is going to hurt, she warned. Everything hurts already. What's a little more? She injected the antidote directly into the wound, and Kaelthor hissed in pain, his hands gripping the edge of the table hard enough to dent the metal. But he didn't pull away, didn't tell her to stop. When she finished, she cleaned the wound properly, applied healing gel and wrapped it in synthetic bandages that would dissolve as the tissue regenerated. You need to rest, she said, stepping back. Real rest. Not this stoic suffering in silence while you pretend everything's fine. I have responsibilities. The garden... I can handle the garden. I can handle the library. I can handle all of it for a few days while you recover. She crossed her arms. Unless you don't trust me to do it right. Of course I trust you, but... Then rest, please. Kaelthor looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but on one condition. What? Tell me why you came running when you heard me roar. You should have stayed away, stayed safe. Why didn't you? Elara took a slow breath. Because in the 3 weeks I've been here, you've never made me feel like property. Never made me feel like I owed you anything for saving my life. You've treated me like a person, like an equal, like someone whose opinions and choices matter. And people like that are rare, Kaelthor. Rare enough that when I thought you might be hurt, I didn't even think about running away. I just ran towards you. Something shifted in his expression. Walls coming down, defenses crumbling. Thank you for caring, for helping, for being braver than I deserve. You deserve more than you think you do. She helped him to his quarters, rooms she had never seen before, large and sparse and somehow lonely despite their grandeur. She made sure he was settled, promised to check on him in a few hours, and left before he could argue further. Back in the garden, Elara stood among the memory flowers and let herself shake. She had touched a dragon today, not just any dragon, but one in pain, one who could have hurt her without thinking if he'd been less in control, and she hadn't been afraid. Not of him, anyway. She was afraid of losing him, though. That had become clear the moment she'd heard his roar. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, this lonely dragon in his mountain fortress had become important to her. Not because he'd saved her, not because he owed her anything or she owed him, but because he was kind and thoughtful and carried his grief with a quiet dignity that reminded her of her mother, because he was her friend. And she was going to make sure he survived long enough to understand that friendship was its own kind of love. She returned to work in the garden, tending the plants with extra care, talking to them the way Kaelthor did, telling them about her day, about her worries, about the strange direction her life had taken. The memory flower for Kaelthor's nest mother swayed in a breeze that didn't exist, and Elara could have sworn its flowers glowed a little brighter, as if in approval, as if saying, take care of him, he needs it more than he knows. I will, Elara promised the flower, the fortress, the mountain itself. I will. Kaelthor healed faster than Elara expected. Within 2 days, the wound had closed completely, leaving only a faint silver scar that he assured her would fade in time. Within a week, he was back to his normal routine, though she noticed he moved a bit more carefully, as if his body were reminding him that even dragons had limits. They didn't talk about what had happened in the medical bay, the vulnerability he'd shown, the fear she'd felt, the way their friendship had shifted into something deeper without either of them quite acknowledging it. Instead, they worked in the garden, they read in the library, they fell back into their comfortable rhythm as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and they both knew it. It was a month to the day after Kaelthor had bought her at auction that the summons arrived. Elara was in the garden, harvesting vegetables for their dinner. She'd planted a small plot of earth crops in one corner, and they were finally bearing fruit, when she heard Kaelthor's voice echo through the fortress, tight with tension. Elara, come to the landing platform, now. She dropped the basket and ran. By the time she reached the platform, a sleek transport vessel had already landed, smaller than Kaelthor's but far more ornate, covered in decorative scales of gold and crimson that marked it as belonging to someone important in the imperial hierarchy. Kaelthor stood facing the ship, his expression carefully neutral, but Elara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. The transport's hatch opened, and a figure emerged. She was a dragon in humanoid form, tall and regal, with scales of deep crimson visible at her throat and wrists. Her hair was black as obsidian, swept up in an elaborate style that must have taken hours to create. She wore robes of silk that shimmered with embedded gems, and her eyes were the cold yellow of a predator assessing prey. Kaelthor. Her voice was smooth as poisoned honey. How rustic. I had forgotten how far you've fallen from proper society. Lady Seraphine. Kaelthor's voice was equally cool. I wasn't aware you made social calls to the frontier. Oh, this isn't a social call. Seraphine's gaze shifted to Elara, and her lip curled in distaste. Is this the human? The one causing such a stir at court? Elara felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, contempt and curiosity mixed in equal measure. She lifted her chin and met the dragon's eyes without flinching. I'm Elara, and you are? Seraphine's eyes narrowed dangerously. You will address me as Lady Seraphine, human. I am second claw to the imperial throne, advisor to His Radiance Emperor Valdris himself. You would do well to remember your place. My place is here, Elara said quietly, as Kaelthor's guest. Guest? Seraphine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Is that what we're calling purchased brides now? How progressive. Kaelthor stepped forward, putting himself slightly between Elara and Seraphine. State your business, lady. The Emperor doesn't send his second claw to remote fortresses without reason. Seraphine pulled a crystal data chip from her robes and held it out. His Radiance requests your presence at court, both of you. It seems your domestic situation has become a topic of considerable interest among the nobility. Questions are being asked, accusations are being made. The Emperor wishes to address these matters personally. Accusations. Kaelthor took the chip, but didn't activate it. What accusations? That you've forsaken your draconic heritage for the companionship of a primitive species, that you're harboring a potential threat to imperial security, that your actions at the auction were either madness or treason, and the court cannot determine which. Seraphine smiled, showing too many teeth. Some even suggest that the human has bewitched you somehow, turned you against your own kind with alien tricks. Elara felt ice settle in her stomach. This was what she had feared from the beginning, that Kaelthor's kindness would paint a target on his back. That's absurd, Kaelthor said flatly. Elara is guilty of nothing except surviving, and I have forsaken nothing. I simply chose compassion over cruelty. If that's considered treasonous now, then the Empire has fallen further than I realized. Be that as it may, you are summoned. The Emperor expects you in 3 days' time for a formal inquiry. If you refuse, it will be taken as confirmation of guilt, and the Imperial Guard will be dispatched to collect you both. If you comply, you will at least have the opportunity to defend yourself before the assembled court. Seraphine turned back toward her transport. I suggest you prepare well. The court is not known for its mercy toward those who embarrass it. She swept back into her ship without another word. The hatch sealed, and the transport lifted off, disappearing into the sky within moments. Kaelthor stood frozen, staring at the data chip in his hand. What does this mean? Elara asked quietly. It means, Kaelthor said, his voice hollow, that my attempt to live outside the Empire's games has failed. They've decided I'm a problem that needs addressing, and they're using you as the excuse to do it. Then we don't go. We stay here. They can't force us. They can, and they will. If I refuse a direct Imperial summons, Valdris will declare me an outlaw. He'll send dragons to bring us in by force, and unlike the younglings who attacked me before, these would be Imperial guards, trained, experienced, and utterly loyal to the throne. We wouldn't survive. Elara felt panic rising in her chest. So what do we do? Kaelthor activated the data chip. A holographic image appeared in the air before them. Formal summons written in High Draconic, stamped with the Emperor's personal seal. The charges were listed in careful legalese, but they boiled down to what Seraphine had said: harboring a potential threat, conduct unbecoming of draconic nobility, possible mental instability, all charges that could result in Kaelthor being stripped of his title, his lands, his freedom, or worse. We go, Kaelthor said finally. We answer the summons. We stand before the court and make them see that you are not a threat, that I have committed no crime except choosing kindness, and we hope that 3,000 years of service to the Empire counts for something. And if it doesn't? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw fear in those ancient eyes for the first time since she'd met him. Then we accept whatever fate the Emperor decrees. Together. The word hung between them. Together. Weighted with meaning neither of them had dared speak aloud until now. I won't let them punish you for saving me, Elara said fiercely. If I have to testify, tell them I begged you to buy me, that I manipulated you somehow. No, Kaelthor's voice was sharp. You will tell them the truth, that I chose this freely, that you have done nothing except exist, and that existence is not a crime. He softened slightly. Besides, lying to the Imperial Court is an executable offense. I won't risk your life that way. But no, Elara, I made my choices with open eyes. I will face the consequences with the same. He placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle despite the strength in it. But I will not let them harm you, that I promise. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Kaelthor taught Elara the protocols of the Imperial Court, how to address the Emperor, how to move through formal spaces, which gestures meant respect and which meant insult. He found clothing for her from storage, formal wear his nest mother had collected from various human colonies, beautiful and appropriate for court without being servile. Elara, in turn, made him promise to be honest in his testimony. No false modesty, no downplaying his reasons for buying her. The truth, plain and simple, and let the court make of it what they would. On the 3rd day they boarded Kaelthor's transport and flew toward the capital. Elara watched the crystal mountains fall away beneath them, and a terrible certainty settled in her bones. Whatever happened in the capital, life would never return to the peaceful simplicity they'd found in the fortress. The city rose before them, like a monument to excess. It sprawled across an entire continent, towers of crystal and metal reaching toward the clouds, connected by bridges of light and suspended gardens. Ships swarmed the air like insects, and even from this distance, Elara could feel the weight of countless lives pressed together. This was the heart of the Draconic Empire, the seat of power that ruled 1,000 worlds, and she was about to walk into it and be judged for the crime of existing. Kaelthor brought the transport down at one of the official landing platforms, and immediately they were surrounded by Imperial guards, dragons in ceremonial armor, their faces hidden behind helmets, shaped like snarling beasts. "Lord Kaelthor," one of them said, voice distorted by the helmet. "You are expected, follow us." They walked through corridors of impossible grandeur, walls of living crystal that pulsed within a light, floors so polished they reflected like mirrors, ceilings painted with murals depicting the Empire's conquests. Everywhere, nobles paused to stare at them, whispering behind their hands. Elara kept her head high and her expression calm, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Finally, they reached a set of doors so massive they must have been meant for dragons in their true forms. The guards pushed them open, revealing the Imperial throne room beyond. It was vast enough to hold hundreds of dragons. The Emperor sat on a throne carved from a single piece of star iron, his form humanoid but clearly ancient, silver scales, eyes like molten gold, a crown of horns that seemed to catch and hold the light. Around him, the court stood in ranks, hundreds of dragons, all watching, all waiting. "Lord Kaelthor," the Emperor's voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. "You stand accused of conduct unbecoming your station. How do you answer?" Kaelthor stepped forward, and Elara followed, her hand finding his without conscious thought. "I answer," Kaelthor said clearly, "that I have committed no crime. I have chosen compassion, and if that is unbecoming of a dragon, then perhaps we have lost our way as a species." The court erupted in outraged whispers. The Emperor leaned forward, his eyes fixed on their joined hands. "We shall see," he said softly. "Let the inquiry begin." And Elara knew with terrible clarity that the next few hours would determine not just her fate, but Kaelthor's, and possibly the fate of every human still suffering under the Empire's rule. The trial had begun, and she would not, could not, let it end in anything but truth. The Imperial court was a theater of judgment. Elara stood beside Kaelthor in the center of the vast chamber, surrounded by hundreds of dragons, who looked at her with everything from curiosity to contempt to outright hatred. The weight of their attention pressed down on her like physical force, but she kept her spine straight and her chin up. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. Emperor Valdris raised one clawed hand, and the murmuring court fell silent. "The charges are thus," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive room. "That Lord Kaelthor, known as Kaelthor the Deathless, warrior of 3,000 years, has violated the dignity of the draconic species by purchasing a human at auction and bringing her into his household, that he has shown preference for this primitive creature over his own kind, that he has, through these actions, brought shame upon the noble houses and called into question his loyalty to the Empire." Valdris paused, his golden eyes moving between Kaelthor and Elara. "These are serious accusations. If proven true, the penalties range from confiscation of property and titles to exile, or worse." He leaned forward slightly. "Lord Kaelthor, you may speak in your defense." Kaelthor stepped forward, releasing Elara's hand. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried the weight of ages. "Your Radiance, honored members of the court, I stand accused of showing compassion to a being who had been stripped of everything, her home, her family, her freedom. I am told this is shameful. I am told this brings dishonor to our species." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled nobles. "I say that the only shame here is that we live in an empire where kindness is considered a crime." Outraged voices erupted throughout the chamber. "How dare he insolence? He insults us all." The Emperor raised his hand again and silence fell like a blade. "Continue, Lord Kaelthor. I purchased Elara because no one else would. She was being sold for less than the cost of a meal, treated as worthless cargo. I saw a person who deserved dignity and I acted. I brought her to my fortress, offered her freedom, and when she chose to stay, I gave her sanctuary. Nothing more, nothing less." Kaelthor's voice hardened. "If 3,000 years of service to this empire have taught me anything, it is that power without compassion becomes tyranny, and I will not participate in tyranny even if refusing costs me everything." Lady Seraphine stood from her place near the throne. "Beautiful words, Lord Kaelthor, but actions speak louder. You claim compassion, yet you keep this human in your household. You tend to her, speak with her, treat her as an equal. Some witnesses report seeing you hold hands with her. She let the implication hang in the air. This goes far beyond simple mercy. This suggests attachment, affection, perhaps even love for a being so far beneath your station that the very concept is obscene. A ripple of agreement passed through the court. Kaelthor did not flinch. And if I do care for her, if in her company I have found something I thought lost to me centuries ago, genuine friendship, honest conversation, someone who sees me as Kaelthor rather than as a title or a weapon, or a relic of a bygone age, is that a crime? When the object of such affection is human, yes. Seraphine's voice dripped with disdain. Humans are short-lived, primitive, barely sentient by our standards. They are useful as labor, perhaps, or as curiosities, but they are not our equals. They never will be. To suggest otherwise is to deny the fundamental truth of draconic superiority. Then I deny it gladly. The court exploded in chaos. Dragons shouted over each other, their voices rising in fury and disbelief. Some called for immediate punishment. Others demanded exile. A few, Elara noticed, remained silent, watching with thoughtful expressions. Emperor Valdris stood, his form growing larger, more imposing. His voice, when it came, silenced the chamber instantly. Enough. He descended from his throne, each step echoing like thunder. I have heard Lord Kaelthor's defense. Now I would hear from the human herself. Every eye in the chamber turned to Elara. Her mouth went dry. She had known this moment would come, had practiced what she might say. But standing here, surrounded by beings who could kill her with a thought, facing an emperor who held her life in his ancient hands, all her prepared speeches fled. She had only the truth. "Your Radiance," she began, her voice smaller than she wanted, but steady. "I am Elara Chen. I was born on New Terra, a human colony destroyed in an imperial raid 6 weeks ago. My parents died defending our home. My brothers died beside them. I was captured, shipped across the galaxy, and sold at auction like livestock. And I believed I would die in chains, forgotten, just another casualty of an empire that sees my species as worthless." She took a breath, finding her courage. "Then Kaelthor bought me, for 10 credits, less than nothing. And he did something I never expected. He treated me like a person. He gave me freedom, shelter, kindness. He asked nothing in return except that I be myself. In his fortress, surrounded by the memories of 1,000 dead civilizations, I found something I thought I had lost forever." She looked directly at the Emperor. "I found hope." "Hope?" Valdris's voice was unreadable. "In the house of a dragon? After dragons killed your family?" "Yes, because Kaelthor showed me that not all dragons are the same, that some carry the weight of what your empire does and feel the shame of it, that some choose differently, even when that choice costs them everything." She gestured at the hostile court around them. "He is being judged for showing me compassion, but I tell you, Your Radiance, that his compassion has done more for human-dragon relations than 1,000 treaties ever could, because he showed me that change is possible. That even in an empire built on conquest, there are those who remember what honor means." "And you believe Lord Kaelthor acts from honor?" the Emperor asked. "I know he does, because he expects nothing from me. I am not his servant, not his possession, not his bride, despite what the auction called me. I am his friend, and he is mine. And if that friendship threatens your empire, then perhaps your empire is built on foundations too weak to withstand a single act of genuine kindness." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from somewhere in the ranks of the court, a single voice spoke. "She makes a fair point." Elara turned to see an ancient dragon step forward, even older than Kaelthor. His scales faded to pale silver, his eyes clouded with age but still sharp. "Lord Varinthis," the Emperor acknowledged. "You wish to speak?" "I do, Your Radiance. I am 5,000 years old. I remember when we were fewer, when we had to cooperate with other species to survive. I remember when we valued wisdom over strength, compassion over conquest." He looked at Kaelthor with something that might have been approval. "This young dragon, and yes, at 3,000 he is young to me, has done nothing except uphold the oldest virtues of our kind. He saw suffering and acted to ease it. He found value in a being others had dismissed. These were once considered the marks of a true noble, not crimes." Another voice joined in. "But she's human, Lord Varinthis. Surely you cannot suggest we treat them as equals." "Why not?" Varinthis turned to face the speaker. "Because they are short-lived. So are most species. Because they are primitive. They were traveling between stars while some of our current noble houses were still hiding in caves. Because they are weak. I have seen humans survive conditions that would break lesser dragons. He paused. Or is it simply that we have spent so long telling ourselves we are superior that we cannot bear the thought of being wrong? The Emperor had remained silent through this exchange, his expression unreadable. Now he spoke, his voice thoughtful. These are weighty matters, questions that strike at the heart of what we are as an empire. He turned back to Kaelthor and Elara. I will make my judgment shortly, but first I have a question for you both. Lord Kaelthor, if I commanded you to return the human to slavery, to deny this friendship you claim, to choose your position in the Empire over her freedom, would you obey? Kaelthor didn't hesitate. No, Your Radiance, I would not. Even if refusal meant exile? Execution? Even then, Valdris turned to Elara. And you, human. If I offered you freedom, a ship, credits enough to start a new life on any colony you chose, but only if you left Kaelthor forever and denied that this friendship existed, what would you choose? Elara met the Emperor's ancient eyes without flinching. I would refuse, Your Radiance, because I have learned that some things matter more than safety or comfort or even survival, and one of those things is standing beside someone who stood beside you when no one else would. The Emperor studied them both for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Interesting. You both choose each other over everything else. Status, safety, even life itself. That is either profound loyalty or profound foolishness. He returned to his throne and sat. The court will adjourn for 1 hour while I consider my judgment. Lord Kaelthor, Elara Chen, you will remain here. Guards, ensure no one disturbs them. The court filed out slowly, dragons casting backward glances, voices rising in speculation the moment they left the chamber. Within minutes, only Kaelthor, Elara, and 4 silent guards remained. Kaelthor turned to Elara, his expression strained. I'm sorry. I had hoped logic and truth would be enough, but the court is too divided, too entrenched in old prejudices. You did your best. We both did. Elara took his hand again. Whatever happens now, I don't regret any of it. The fortress, the garden, the library, you gave me back my life. Even if we lose it again today, I'm grateful. You shouldn't have to be grateful for being treated like a person. Maybe not. But I am anyway. They stood together in the center of the vast chamber, 2 small figures against the backdrop of imperial power, and waited for judgment. When the court returned, the Emperor's expression was grave. I have made my decision, Valdris announced. The charges against Lord Kaelthor are complex. His actions, while unorthodox, do not constitute treason. His compassion, while unusual, is not illegal, and his friendship with the human Elara, while unprecedented, is not forbidden by any law of this empire. Hope flickered in Elara's chest. However, the Emperor continued, and that hope guttered like a candle in the wind. The court's concerns cannot be dismissed. Lord Kaelthor has chosen to publicly prioritize a human over draconic society. This sets a dangerous precedent. Therefore, my judgment is this. Lord Kaelthor will retain his titles and his fortress. Elara Chen will be granted full citizen status within the Empire, a first for a human and a great honor. But there is one condition. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on them both. You must prove beyond doubt that this friendship benefits the Empire. You claim that compassion can change hearts and build bridges. I challenge you to demonstrate this. You will serve as ambassadors, Lord Kaelthor representing the Empire, Elara representing humanity. You will travel to worlds on the border of our territory, mediate disputes, show that cooperation between species is possible. He paused. You will have 1 year. If, at the end of that year, you have succeeded in bringing lasting peace to even 3 contested worlds, I will declare this experiment a success and grant full recognition to human-dragon partnerships. If you fail, he left the consequence unspoken. Kaelthor and Elara exchanged glances. Your Radiance, Kaelthor said slowly, are you saying we would have the Empire's support in this endeavor? Limited support. You will have authority to negotiate on the Empire's behalf, but you will operate largely independently. Succeed or fail on your own merits. Valdris's expression softened slightly. I am an old dragon, Lord Kaelthor. Perhaps not as old as Verinthis, but old enough to remember when we were different. Better in some ways. I would like to see if we can be that again, but I cannot simply decree it. The court must be shown, not told. So show them, show all of us, that your way works. It was more than Elara had dared hope for. It was also a nearly impossible task. She looked at Kaelthor and saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. This was a test they might well fail, but it was also a chance to prove that kindness was not weakness, that compassion could build rather than destroy. We accept your Radiance, Kaelthor said. As do I, Elara added. The Emperor nodded. Then this inquiry is concluded. You have 1 week to prepare before you begin your mission. Use it wisely. Dismissed. The court began to file out, voices rising in speculation and argument, but Elara barely heard them. She was too busy trying to process what had just happened. They had survived. More than survived. They had been given a chance to change the Empire itself. It was terrifying. It was also exactly what her mother would have told her to do. Don't let them make you cruel. Whatever happens, whatever they do, don't let them take your heart. She hadn't. And now somehow that heart had become the key to everything. 1 year later, Elara stood on the observation deck of their diplomatic vessel, watching the stars stream past, and tried to remember what exhaustion felt like when she wasn't living it every day. The year had been brutal, beautiful and transformative, and absolutely brutal. They had traveled to 14 contested worlds, mediated 17 disputes, prevented 3 wars, and barely survived 2 assassination attempts. They had been praised as heroes and condemned as traitors, sometimes by the same people on the same day. They had slept in luxury suites on some worlds and under open sky on others. They had eaten at the tables of kings and shared rations with refugees. And through it all, Kaelthor had been beside her, steady as the mountains of his fortress home. Behind her she heard his footsteps. She had learned to recognize them months ago, the particular rhythm of his gait, the way he moved with purpose, even when he was simply walking across a room. "We'll be at the rendezvous point in 3 hours, he said, coming to stand beside her. Are you ready? I don't know. Are we? Elara gestured at the data pad in her hand, displaying their mission summary. 3 successful peacekeeping initiatives. Exactly what the Emperor demanded. But will it be enough to change minds back at the capital? It will have to be. We've done everything we can. Elara looked at the list of their achievements, each one representing weeks or months of difficult, delicate work. On Kresh 7, they had mediated a dispute between draconic colonists and the indigenous insectoid population. The dragons had wanted to claim mineral-rich territories sacred to the Kresh. Elara had proposed a compromise, shared mining rights in exchange for draconic protection against raiders and imperial investment in Kresh infrastructure. It had taken 6 weeks of negotiation, but both sides had finally agreed. The treaty they signed was now being held up as a model for cooperative development. On Velros Prime they had prevented a war. The Velrosians had been preparing to rebel against imperial rule, driven to desperation by heavy taxes and restrictive trade laws. Kaelthor had used his authority to reduce the tax burden and open trade routes. Elara had spent weeks living among the Velrosians, learning their grievances, translating them into terms the imperial bureaucracy could understand. The rebellion had been averted, and Velros Prime was now one of the most prosperous worlds in the sector. And on Threshold, a remote colony world on the edge of imperial space, they had done something even more remarkable. They had brought together representatives from 6 different species: dragons, humans, Kresh, Velrosians, Zenthari, and others, and created the first true multi-species council. The Threshold Accords, as they were being called, established principles of equal representation, mutual respect, and shared governance. It was a radical departure from the imperial model of draconic supremacy, and it was working. "Do you think it's enough?" Elara asked quietly. "Not just for the Emperor's test, but enough to actually change things?" Kaelthor was silent for a moment. "I used to think the Empire was unchangeable, a machine too large and too old to be steered in any direction except the one it had always gone. But this year has shown me otherwise." He turned to face her. "We've proven that cooperation works better than domination, that compassion is stronger than fear, that a human woman and an ancient dragon can accomplish together what neither could alone. If that's not enough to change minds, then nothing will be. And if the court rejects it anyway, then we'll have tried, and we'll have made a difference on those worlds, even if the Empire as a whole refuses to change. That matters, Elara. What we did this year matters, regardless of how the court votes." Elara nodded slowly. He was right, of course, but she couldn't help the nervous flutter in her stomach. In a few hours they would stand before Emperor Valdris again and present their findings. The fate of human-dragon relations throughout the Empire would rest on his judgment. No pressure. "Come on," Kaelthor said gently. "Let's review the presentation one more time, and then you need to rest. You've barely slept in 3 days. Neither have you. I'm a dragon. I can function on minimal sleep for weeks if necessary. That doesn't mean you should." He smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. the kind he had learned to give freely over the past year. "Are you taking care of me again?" "Someone has to. You'd work yourself to death otherwise." "Probably true." They returned to the main cabin and spent the next hour reviewing their presentation. Charts, testimonials, economic data, security analyses, everything carefully organized to make the strongest possible case. When they finished, Kaelthor physically removed the datapad from Elara's hands and guided her to the sleeping quarters. "Rest. I'll wake you when we're close." Elara wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She lay down and was asleep within minutes. She woke to Kaelthor's gentle touch on her shoulder. "We're approaching the capital." Elara sat up, rubbing her eyes. Through the viewport, she could see the massive city planet growing larger, its countless lights bright enough to rival the stars. She dressed quickly in formal attire, not the same simple clothes she had worn a year ago, but proper diplomatic robes, designed to honor both human and draconic aesthetics. Kaelthor wore ceremonial armor, polished to a mirror shine, his silver hair braided in the traditional style of ancient noble houses. They looked, Elara thought, like people who knew their worth, like equals. The landing platform was crowded. Word had spread about their return, and it seemed half the court wanted to witness the outcome. Guards formed a corridor through the crowd, and Kaelthor and Elara walked it together, heads high. The throne room was just as imposing as Elara remembered, perhaps more so knowing what was at stake. Emperor Valdris sat on his star-iron throne, surrounded by his council. Lady Seraphine stood to his right, her expression carefully neutral. Lord Verinthis stood to his left, looking pleased. "Lord Kaelthor, Elara Chen," the Emperor's voice filled the chamber. "You have returned. Present your findings." Kaelthor stepped forward and activated the holographic display. Data sprang to life in the air before them. Maps, statistics, testimonials, images of the worlds they had visited. "Your Radiance, members of the court. 1 year ago we accepted a challenge to prove that cooperation between species could benefit the Empire. We have completed that mission." He gestured at the display. "We successfully mediated conflicts on 14 worlds. We established 3 landmark peace agreements that have become models for diplomatic resolution. We created the first multi-species governing council in Imperial history, and we did it through compassion, negotiation, and mutual respect." Elara picked up the narrative. "The economic data speaks for itself. Worlds under cooperative governance are 23% more productive than those under traditional imperial rule. Trade has increased by 37% in sectors where we established dialogue. Rebellion and unrest have decreased by 41%. She paused, looking around the chamber. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The real success is in the changed hearts. Humans who once feared dragons now work alongside them. Dragons who once dismissed humans as primitive now recognize them as partners, and other species see the Empire not as a conqueror, but as a potential ally. Kaelthor gestured to bring up a new display, testimonials from leaders on the worlds they had visited. Dragons, humans, Kresh, Velrosians, all speaking about the positive changes cooperation had brought. "This is what compassion achieves," Kaelthor said quietly. "This is what we gain when we choose to see others as people rather than resources. Your Radiance, you challenged us to prove our way works. We have done so. The question now is whether the Empire has the courage to embrace it." Silence fell across the throne room. Emperor Valdris stood, his ancient form radiating power, and descended from his throne. He walked past Kaelthor and Elara, studying the data displays, reading the testimonials. The court held its collective breath. Finally, he turned back to face them. "You have exceeded expectations. I asked for 3 successes. You provided 14. I asked for proof of concept. You provided transformation." He paused, his golden eyes sweeping across the assembled court. "But the decision to change the Empire cannot be mine alone. The court must decide." He turned to address the nobles. "You have seen the evidence. You have heard the testimonials. The question before you is simple. Do we continue as we have, ruling through strength alone? Or do we evolve, embracing the cooperation these two have proven possible?" He gestured at Kaelthor and Elara. "Cast your votes. Let history record your choice." What followed was chaos. Dragons shouted over each other, arguing passionately for and against the proposal. Lady Seraphine stood and spoke eloquently about tradition and the dangers of change. Lord Verinthis countered with equal eloquence about stagnation and the need for evolution. Younger dragons surprised everyone by largely supporting the new approach. They had seen the economic benefits and wanted those advantages for their own holdings. Older dragons were more divided, some clinging to tradition, others remembering a time before the empire had become what it now was. The debate raged for 2 hours. Finally, Emperor Valdris called for silence. "The court has spoken. The votes have been tallied." He paused, and Elara felt her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. By a margin of 63% to 37%, the court accepts the proposal. The empire will adopt cooperative governance models. Human-dragon partnerships will be officially recognized and encouraged. The threshold accords will become the template for future diplomatic initiatives. He looked directly at Kaelthor and Elara. "And you two will be appointed as the first imperial envoys for interspecies relations, with full authority to continue this work across the empire." The chamber erupted, cheers from some quarters, protests from others, but mostly a stunned sense that something fundamental had just shifted. Elara felt tears streaming down her face. They had done it. Against all odds, against every expectation, they had actually changed the empire. Kaelthor's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "We did it," he whispered. "We did it," she echoed. Emperor Valdris raised his hand and the chamber quieted once more. "There is one more matter to address. Elara Chen, you were purchased at auction for 10 credits. That transaction is hereby nullified. You are granted full citizenship, noble status and a seat on the Imperial Council, if you choose to accept it." Elara could barely speak. Your Radiance, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept. The Empire needs voices like yours, voices that remember what it is to suffer under our rule and who can guide us to be better." "Then I accept. Thank you." Valdris nodded. "This session is concluded. Lord Kaelthor, Lady Elara, remain. I wish to speak with you privately." The court filed out slowly, still buzzing with conversation and argument. When the last noble had departed, the emperor descended fully from his throne and approached them, his formal demeanor softening. "You've accomplished something remarkable," he said quietly. "But I must warn you, not everyone will accept these changes gracefully. You have made enemies today among the traditionalists. You will need to be careful." "We understand, Your Radiance," Kaelthor said, "and we're prepared." Valdris studied them both for a long moment. "Tell me something. This partnership of yours, it began as an act of mercy, evolved into friendship, but I sense something more there now. Am I wrong?" Elara and Kaelthor exchanged glances. They had been so focused on their mission, on proving that cooperation worked, that they hadn't really addressed what had grown between them over the past year. The late nights working together, the moments of crisis where they had relied on each other completely, the quiet conversations in transit, sharing hopes and fears, the way their hands always seemed to find each other. "You're not wrong, Your Radiance," Elara said quietly. "I care for him, deeply, more than I probably should given our differences. And I love her," Kaelthor added simply, "not despite those differences, but because of what we've built together, because she challenges me to be better, because she sees me, truly sees me, in a way no one else ever has." The Emperor nodded slowly. "Love between species is complicated. It challenges the very foundation of how we think about ourselves. But then, so does everything you've accomplished this year." He smiled slightly. "Perhaps that's the point. You've shown us that the old certainties no longer serve us, that we must grow or stagnate. And if an ancient dragon and a young human can find love across the vast gulf between your species, then perhaps anything is possible." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Your old fortress in the Crystal Mountains. It's yours, of course, but I suspect you won't be spending much time there in the coming years. You have an empire to transform. Try not to let it transform you instead." With that, he swept from the chamber, leaving Kaelthor and Elara alone. They stood in silence for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. Then Elara laughed, a sound of pure relief and disbelief and joy. "Did we just change the entire political structure of a galactic empire?" "I think we did," Kaelthor said, sounding equally stunned. "And did you just tell the Emperor you love me?" "I did. Sorry if that was presumptuous. I probably should have told you first." Elara turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "You should have, but I'm glad you said it, because I love you too. Somewhere between the auction block and today, somewhere between the garden and the stars, I fell in love with you. My lonely dragon who spent 10 credits to save a life and ended up changing an empire." Kaelthor pulled her into an embrace, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now?" He pulled back to look at her, his golden eyes bright. "Now, we go back to the fortress. We rest, we celebrate, and then we start the real work, showing this empire what cooperation truly means, building bridges, changing hearts, one world at a time, one dragon at a time, one human at a time. Together, always together." They left the throne room hand in hand, walking out into a future neither of them could have imagined a year ago. A future where a human could stand as nobility in a draconic empire, where compassion was strength rather than weakness, where love could bridge even the vastest differences. It wouldn't be easy. Change never was. There would be opposition, setbacks, failures, but they had proven something crucial, that it was possible. That two people, impossibly different, could find common ground and build something beautiful from it. As their ship left the capital and headed back toward the Crystal Mountains, Elara stood at the viewport and watched the stars. She thought about her mother, about her brothers, about everyone from New Terra who hadn't survived to see this day. She wished they could know that their deaths hadn't been meaningless. That change was coming, slowly, but inevitably. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered to the stars, "for teaching me not to become cruel, for showing me that hearts matter more than species or power or revenge. I hope I made you proud." Behind her, Kaelthor approached and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "She would be proud," he said softly, "just as my nest mother would be proud. They were both right, you know. The ones who taught us that compassion was the greatest strength." Yeah, they were. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars stream past, heading home to a fortress that now meant something different than it had a year ago. Not a place of isolation, but a sanctuary. Not a monument to the past, but a foundation for the future. The lonely dragon had bought an alien bride for 10 credits, and together they had shocked an entire empire. But more than that, they had given it hope. And hope, Elara had learned, was worth more than all the credits in the galaxy.